Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so this Riyadh Comedy Festival, a comedy festival that they're throwing in Saudi Arabia with a bunch of American comics, has genuinely become a big deal in the comedy world. Lots of conversations happening about it, different comedians dissenting from their peers about whether it's like appropriate to perform at this. And the comedians who have been lumped in with the lineup for this show are taking a lot of shots from comedians who either weren't invited or were invited and turned it down. And this all kind of started with like a little bit of a whisper because people like Tim Dillon, Bill Burr, Dave Chappelle, Louis C.K. all popped up on this poster for this Riyadh Comedy Festival. And it was just kind of a reminder that like, oh, comedians in general are kind of sellouts, and even ones like Bill Burr, who have been taking some pretty meaningful, principled stances as of late, are still susceptible to just taking the bag and not really thinking that much about where it's coming from. This is interesting to me because it's funny what the more right-wing side of the comedy audience, it's interesting to me what they find to be a genuine cross of the line and not. And that's why it's interesting that there's been more commentary popping up, criticizing comedians for things they say, but also just their general behavior, because comedians have gotten a pretty free ride over the last, 5 years, where pretty much anything terrible about them, whether it appears to spill into real life or not, can kind of just be written off about the fact that, hey, they're comedians and that's part of what they do. And even though this premise has been laid out there that the audience is just right-wing now and wants to hear offensive jokes and that sort of thing, I think that we're starting to see that that's only half true, or that there's at least a little bit of pushback from people who genuinely are in these audiences and follow these characters, but are not liking this just like complete shamelessness that's coming from them, especially because comedy's doing well right now for the most part. It's not doing as well as it was maybe a couple years ago, but these comedians on this list shouldn't necessarily need to take this money. And at least a couple of them have said that they won't. And in the case of Tim Dillon, he kind of made a few jokes about Saudi Arabia in general, just in response to the controversy of this whole thing, and got fired. He got himself fired by yapping on podcasts about Saudi Arabia. So that's kind of the most interesting turning point in this whole thing so far, is Tim Dillon was brushing it off and being like, hey, what the fuck? I'm not going to take money from Saudi Arabia. What am I, some saint? You know, that's what he was rationalizing in the podcast that I saw. And it turns out even that they weren't okay with. And the little jokes that he made about, the things about Saudi Arabian culture that these comedians are kind of implicitly condoning by doing this festival. And there's reasons for that, and I'll get into that later. He was kind of defending that, and even that, exercising some, critical speech in that way is still too much. So it's just an interesting reminder for these guys of not only why with audiences is this viewed as an inappropriate thing for you to do, but even for you guys, based on your own principles and what you want to be able to say on stage and off stage. This is a compromise for that. So here's a couple different comedians from Marc, Maron, Shane Gillis, and Tim Dillon talking about this Riyadh Comedy Festival thing. And we'll see. This is probably going to blow over for the most part, but I think the guys, like Bill Burr and some of the other people involved in this probably didn't think that this was going to leave as much of a scar as it might.
You're asking me to go to the Middle East soon.
What? Where? Why?
Saudi Arabia and UAE or Dubai. I think I'm gonna pass.
Yeah. For the troops? Is it for the troops?
Not for the troops.
What?
It's for the Saudis.
For the Saudi princes?
Yeah, and everyone's like, yeah, you should do it. Everyone's doing it. It's like, for Saudis?
Yeah.
Weren't those the 9/11 guys?
So I thought.
Aren't they exactly the 9/11 guys? I should have taken I gotta take the Saudi Arabia deal. I should have taken it. I'm washed.
So I do get the fact that they perpetrated 9/11.
I'm not doing it.
That is good. I admire that.
Then they doubled the bag, It was like,
They doubled the bag, the princes?
It was a significant bag.
What?
But I'd already said no. You know? I took a principled stand.
Yeah, against Saudi Arabia.
It wasn't even that. I didn't even think about it.
I thought we were allies with
I didn't
Saudi
even really
Arabia.
think. Yeah, we are. We give them a ton of.
So why the hell they do 9/11 to us?
Wasn't Osama bin Laden just from Saudi Arabia?
Every single hijacker, basically.
Yeah.
Was Saudi.
Yeah, you don't 9/11 your friends, bro.
Don't 9/11 your friends.
You don't. That's up.
And go over and go, hey guys, you guys want to talk about? I was in 7th grade when you guys did that. It was nuts.
Well, there's a Riyadh Comedy Festival. I don't know if you heard about that. This is true. There's a Riyadh, Saudi Arabia Comedy Festival. I mean, how do you even promote that? You know, like from the folks that brought you 9/11. 2 weeks of laughter in the desert. Don't miss it. I mean, the same guy that's going to pay them is the same guy that paid that guy to bonesaw Jamal Khashoggi and put him in a fucking suitcase. But don't let that stop the yucks. It's going to be a good time. Full disclosure, I was not asked to perform at the Riyadh Comedy Festival, so it's kind of easy for me to take the high road on this one. Easy to maintain your integrity when no one's offering to buy it out, you know?
I was supposed to perform in Dubai. I mixed up Dubai and I said Abu Dhabi. Apparently this is a big deal over there. This is like a real problem. My agent called me and he goes, you said on Joe Rogan that you were performing in Abu Dhabi and you're actually performing in Dubai. They're cities and they have a rivalry. And I go, dude, who gives a fuck? What do I stop? I made a mistake. This is not a malicious slander. It's a mistake. He goes, well, they're very angry and they sent an email that you need to be controlled. I said, well, good luck. Whatever. I don't have to do it. I don't care. And then he called me a few days later and I thought he was going to talk about the Kimmel thing. But he called me and he said, they heard what you said about them having slaves. And I said, I was being positive about it. I was defending them. He goes, well, I know that. I know you were defending them. I said, I was defending them for having slaves. I literally said, slaves are probably hard workers and for the most part, agreeable. People were coming up to me saying, why would you go to that country? They have slaves. In Tribeca, they're assaulting me, these people. I'm just leaving a lunch and they're coming out. They have slaves, they say. And of course, I addressed it in a funny way and they fired me. And then they told me, they go, my agents, they all call me, you don't have to talk about this, they say. Don't talk about it. Remember when you talked about Joker? I said, what? They go, it hurts you to talk about these things. In what? In what is even left, you bums? This is the first time I've been fired by people that actually do really bad things. So let's take this win.
Shane Gillis seems to consistently be finding himself on the right side of these issues. And I'm not sure if it's just like a likability factor with him or the fact that he just has actually good judgment. I'm not really sure, because I think you could make arguments that his judgment hasn't been always that good in the past. But at the same time, ever since he kind of had the whole SNL debacle, it just seems like he thinks through his positions on things and what he says pretty carefully, and is also able to be funny within that. Shane Gillis is an interesting guy because people from almost every side of the spectrum want to uphold him as some kind of like positive example, right? And I think that's probably a little bit unsustainable. He's, going to disappoint somebody on some side at some point. He's not flawless, but I think he gets a lot of goodwill. So I'm kind of interested to see where that goes. And it's especially because of stuff like this, because on a thing that I personally wouldn't have expected the at-large comedy audience to get upset about, all of a sudden there's a lot of pushback, and the people who decided on a principled level to turn that money down are looking pretty good now, and they're also able to come out and throw some shots at the people who did take the money. Stavros Halkias is another person who has made some jokes about it, although it wasn't, necessarily worth clipping, I didn't think. This has genuinely become a controversial thing amongst comedians, and you've seen the same thing happen with the Joe Rogan sphere and whether or not sort of giving into this Austin style of comedy that seems to be emerging is like the right direction for comedy, or whether it's as inevitable as people wanted to act like it is, especially after Trump won kind of on the back of Joe Rogan and even Tony Hinchcliffe a little bit. Not saying Tony Hinchcliffe was a heavyweight there, but he was there. You know, it just makes you look at that differently. And that's what happens when you get into politics. So I don't think that the comedians who signed up for this show thought that this would get that politicized, and that's where they just kind of made an obvious miscalculation. So probably the most disappointing person to see on this list is Bill Burr, who, like I said, you know, he just seems like he has his head on straight about the powers that be lately. And I get that Saudi Arabia is kind of separate from what he's been talking about, and probably a lot of them rationalize it to themselves that way of like, listen, I don't really know what's going on over there. It's not my country. They want to pay me to do a comedy show. It's the same as any other comedy show. But the reality is that this is being used to kind of whitewash the reputation of Saudi Arabia, and that's why this comedy festival goes all the way up to the highest levels. These are high-level Saudi officials that are putting this on, and they're doing it because they want to use American comedians to put a more friendly face on their country in general and sort of rebrand themselves as something that's friendly to this type of, I don't know, free speech, humor, entertainment, whatever. They're trying to make it the biggest comedy festival ever in the world. They're trying to do this big. And so they're using the names of American comics to sort of whitewash the crimes that they're associated with, whether it be 9/11 or the dismembering of Jamal Khashoggi. But it also is just kind of instinctually correct for these comedians to point out, you know, oh, you're doing a comedy show for the 9/11 guys? It's just funny. And it's also funny to me that has become an understood thing, that Saudi Arabia is responsible for 9/11, at least in some way, because we've actually never gotten any official information on that yet. It's not like, you know, one of these things where at a certain point the government decides it's okay for you to know what really happened now. That almost happened with Biden. It usually happens on about a 20-year basis. And there was a period where Biden was going to release some files about 9/11. There was some speculation that was going to be at least some kind of tangential proof that Saudi Arabia had more to do with it than any other country. But Biden decided not to release that. So as far as I know, we never got that information. But it does seem to be that impression has been pretty well laid amongst a lot of people, which is just interesting to me because we were just absolutely flooded with propaganda about Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan being the ones responsible for that. So it's funny when you get an offer as somebody who does speech of some kind for a living, and you get an offer that directly does cut against your ability to speak freely. One thing that Tim Dillon says is that I wasn't planning to come on your stage and say bad things about your country. First of all, because it's illegal. And second of all, because that's not the point here. So none of these comedians who are participating in this show are like allowed to criticize Saudi Arabia. They fired Tim Dillon from overseas because of something that he said on his own podcast. What he's referring to about saying the thing about slaves was something he said on his own podcast. And he also made a couple jabs on Joe Rogan's podcast as well, which I covered at the time. And I mean, at the time, I thought that was a really weak response to the criticism that he was getting, that he's willing to take this money. And even you see in his response here, he's like, yeah, I took the money. Why wouldn't I take the money? Then they fire me. And it's like, oh yeah, well, we'll take the win. Saudi Arabia sucks anyway. So, I mean, that's really the guy you're dealing with there in Tim Dillon. But by being willing to say something like that, he put himself at the center of what is actually controversial about this whole thing. It should also be noted that the Human Rights Watch is urging these comedians that are doing this show to use it as an opportunity to speak out against Saudi Arabia's government, because they can. They're probably not going to get chopped up into little pieces and put in a suitcase, especially if good numbers of them come out and do that. But that's why they fired Tim Dillon like that, because they want to silence any criticism. And so any comedian worth half his salt would use this as an opportunity to say some shit that you're really not allowed to say. And these free speech warriors, we're going to see that all of them are going to chicken out on the premise that what you say and your free speech is actually under repression by the government, and you're not allowed to just say whatever you want. and you've been pretending for the last several years that that's a really big problem for you. A lot of you motherfuckers have been yapping about free speech, bro, for so long. And then now we see direct attacks on free speech happening in America, and whole hell of a lot of you are taking money in a way that directly contradicts your ability to say whatever you want. That's just interesting. Bill Burr has been quiet about this. A lot of these folks have been quiet about this. It's happening right now, as I understand. I think it just started and it's going through October 9th. So we'll see if anything changes. Most of these people are probably just gonna do their sets and try to move on with their careers, and they're just hoping for this whole thing to blow over. But it seems to me that the type of audience backlash I'm seeing here might sting for a while. Because while some of this stuff that pops up about, I don't know, anybody who's like the target at the time, Brendan Schaub, Bert Kreischer, even now Joe Rogan and Tony Hinchcliffe a little bit, it's like, it seems like petty internet drama, and it certainly is. But also it leaves a mark too. Like, I'm not even talking about myself, but when some of these other comedy critique channels, you know, just hammer somebody like Bert Kreischer or Brendan Schaub over and over again, it's like, it does genuinely leave a mark on their reputation. There's something about comedy and the audience of comedy that it's insular enough that this stuff gets around, and even the comedians start talking about it, and then that feeds back into the podcast critique loop, and then that gets back to the comedians, and then they're making fun of each other over that. So it's just interesting, because it's not that often that as audience members, you get access to the people that you're critiquing with the critique you're doing. And there's at least a couple people in the comedy critique space that have gotten big enough that their critiques are actually making it to the people that they're talking about, in some cases in a way that's like actually hurting their feelings. In the case of Tim Dillon, it seems to have played a part in him getting fired. So just an interesting dynamic, and just another development at the ways that podcasting continues to be the dominant art form of our time for whatever reason.